With aviation news, let's give it up for Richard Kaplan. You know, I mean, I know nothing about planes, but in the news all week long I hear about fire in the cockpit, fire in the cockpit. So I called Rocco and I said, let's get Rich on it because it's happened several times. So Rich, what is going on with all these fires in the cockpits?
First of all, good evening, Long Beach. The skies are clear and you're clear for takeoff. Let's begin. What's happening basically is we are seeing a spike in incidents in fire in the cockpit. A lot of people are not aware that this is not an uncommon problem. In fact, this is a very common problem, and I'm going to break down for you one of the most cataclysmic examples of this very element playing its evil part. On September 2nd, 1998, an MD-11 that took off from your backyard, John F. Kennedy International Airport, was bound for Zurich. This was Swissair Flight 111. About 53 minutes into the flight, cruising at an altitude of 33,000 feet, the flight crew reported a suspicious odor in the cockpit. The flight crew decided to then divert to Halifax International Airport. This would play a crucial role. After 13 minutes from the odor being detected, the flight data recorder on board the McDonnell Douglas MD-11 began to record a series of aircraft system failures. One by one, the systems that were vital to keep this airplane, which is actually an MD-11, just like the one that crashed, in the air, were failing. About 1 minute later, radio communications and radar contact was lost with Swissair 111. And at exactly 10:31 p.m. Atlantic Daylight Savings Time, the plane crashed into the ocean off the coast of Peggy's Loft, Nova Scotia. Forgive me, a little blooper there. Now, what makes this crash so devastating was not the amount of people on board, but the fact that it brought to light something that the aviation community has tried to hide for years. And that is that they made a lot of mistakes in the development of some of the planes that we fly on each and every day. One of them was a little known chemical called MPET, or metallized polyethylene terephthalate. Now, what this chemical is a compound that is used on the aircraft's thermal blanket. Now, if you look at this plane inside, try to picture you're in the cabin and hidden behind the walls are thermal blankets. What the thermal blanket does is it protects the passengers and more so the aircraft from rapid decompression. An airplane basically is like a balloon. There is air compressed inside. The minute you poke a hole anywhere in the fuselage, the air rapidly decompresses and the plane literally drops out of the sky like a rock. What was unknown to the crew and to the industry on a whole was that MPET was highly flammable. What happened in this particular case, and I want to thank the Canadian government for providing me a copy of the actual flight report that the NTSB and the CSB concluded on, which I have in my phone. They explained that the anomaly started in the front of the aircraft where the wiring for the in-flight entertainment system was. The pilots had no clue there was even a fire because the odor was nothing like a fire. They assumed, and they even radioed in, that they believed there was a problem with the ventilation system and the air conditioning. Now, on an MD-11, the air conditioning system is as complex as your central air in your home. You have computers that operate everything from the oxygen to regulating the data that goes into the recorders, as well as your ailerons, your flaps, your engines, and so forth. One by one, because of the MPET that was in these blankets, the fire was feeding the way, no pun intended here, Christine, a dog feeds off of Valpo. This fire went rapidly out of control in a matter of minutes. The pilots really had no clue, and by the time they figured it out, it was too late to make any corrections. There was no way this plane would even make it to Halifax. What this taught the industry on a whole, and I have the report right here and I'm going to refer to it now, there were 14 recommendations that were made not just to Swissair, but to the industry on a whole. This is why this is such an important topic, and I'm very thankful that Howie brought up doing this, because I believe it needs to be addressed. The NTSB concluded that MPET should no longer ever be used on aircraft because of its flammability. It also concluded the airline had never implemented an in-flight training program for the crew in regards to fire suppression. They had no idea how to put out a fire, much less how to deal with it. They also implemented a new design for the thermal blanket. They changed the telemetry. They made it simpler for them to reset all the circuits on the aircraft, which is what they tried to do. Whenever you have an electrical anomaly, the first thing you do in your home, you go to your circuit breakers and you check each one of them to see which one's failing. Well, in this case, on an MD-11, you've got close to 1,000 of them. So it's very difficult to know which circuit breaker is failing. This is not an isolated incident, as Howie pointed out. More often than not, because the planes are becoming more sophisticated, the instrumentation no longer is dials and gauges. Now we're using computers. More and more wiring is being used. Now on a Boeing 747, a lot of people may not know this, you have close to 1,000 miles of wire stretched all throughout the jet. It's very easy for one of those wires to fail and for an anomaly of events to occur that can bring down a jet just like this one. What we've learned is that we need to be more aware of the fibers that we coat these wires with. We need to be more aware of what we train our pilots to do in the event of a fire. And most important of all, agencies such as the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey constantly train to deal with this very event. And I very quickly want to send a shout out to the brave men and women of PANYNJ. You are our guardians on the ground when we are in the sky. And finally, I want to just point out that since then, I don't want you guys panicking out there thinking, oh, I'm going to get on a plane, it's probably going to fall out of the sky. It's not going to happen. The industry is very good at correcting itself. That's why we have the NTSB. That's why there are people like me out there watching and policing the industry, making sure that this does not happen. And I can assure you that as long as there is blood in my veins, those planes will remain in the sky where they belong, getting to their destinations on time. With that being said, you've just been cleared for takeoff. Have a great evening.
Right. Great job. And you know what? I've learned a lot over these segments, and I gave Richard an assignment, which he's going to tackle next week, which is an extremely fascinating story. Can you imagine? Just think about this. There's 250 people on a plane. The plane crashes. One person miraculously survives. Think about that. 250 people die, but one person. Well, in the history, this has happened about 10 or 12 times where a plane went down and one person survived. And think about what that person has to deal with. In a lot of these cases, these people lost their entire families, but for some reason, God let them live or whatever. But so I watched a documentary on this, and they actually got some of these people together. And it was very fascinating. And next week, Richard is going to do an in-depth report on this, and I think it's going to be quite fascinating.
I'm extremely honored to do that segment because I've had the opportunity to meet several people in my school when I went to aviation school, and they talked about it. And it's a very important thing because you are not alone. Plane crashes are very cataclysmic events. They very rarely happen, but when they do, it is important that we support these people, we listen to what they have to say, because they've experienced something that many of us will never even be able to possibly comprehend. And I just want to send a very quick shout out to Il Kashani. He helps me on some of these segments. He's an aviation expert in New Jersey. Happy birthday, Il. We love you.
Okay. Great job, Richard. Excellent. That was great. And, meantime tonight,